According to new research, historians have said that the Book of Esther was written in the 4th century BCE. Researchers have detailed that the origin of the book and its authenticity have been heavily debated, with some historians saying that some of the dates and facts don't line up. Interestingly, a digger in Iran has allegedly found the original Book of Esther, detailing that everything is written in pure gold, and saying that the find is estimated to be thousands of years old. The digger who found it didn't release that much information about it, which led some to believe that the finding could have been made by a robber in the area. Those who saw the post did say that it's not rare to find old scriptures and treasures within this area, and that sometimes they're purchased by anonymous bidders, which is why these diggers roam historically important areas in the hopes of finding something of value. One of the problems that people have with these types of finds is that they usually don't end up in the open market, and are sold before historians and researchers can conduct their inspections. The digger though said that the scroll was likely the original Book of Esther, and has solid gold writing. One user said the following: "Have you ever researched the authenticity of this book? My research has led me to believe that all of these ancient books are based on real events, and when that happens it means there has to be an original book. I think that what we have here is the original book. How would you go about faking something like this? How would you add in the gold writing? And how would you make it look this old? For me, this has to be real, because once people realize it's fake, then it will be worthless. Who would go through all of the effort to make something fake?" Well, this user said the following: "A few alarm bells are going off. Why is the person not using gloves to look at this discovery? If this is an original, then firstly it's priceless, and secondly you would think that someone of that faith would use a bit more care when examining this thing. The problem I have with these discoveries is that we get a few photographs, maybe a short video, and then we never see the item again. It's a shame because I think it looks interesting and I'd love to know what it is. Although I don't think it's the original, it doesn't mean that it's not something interesting. Perhaps it's something like a replica. We've seen these all across various ancient civilizations, with ancient Egypt being one of them. Although I think it looks really interesting, I don't think this is an original." Most have agreed that more research needs to be carried out on relics like this in order to come to a conclusive answer. The Mesopotamian flood has been speculated on for centuries, and has been investigated time and time again. The majority of historians assert that the Great Flood occurred during the rise of humanity, and was the source of the biblical tale of Noah's Ark. During excavations in 1928 to 1929, archaeologists at the historical sites of Ur and Kish unearthed flood deposits, which they connected with the flood as according to ancient Hebrew scriptures. Sir Charles Leonard Woolley, a famous British archaeologist, arrived at the scene to investigate further, and it did not take him long to reach his conclusion. It was in his eyes proof of the flood. In an excerpt from his 1954 book, he said the following: "By the time I had written up my notes, I was quite convinced of what it all meant, but I wanted to see whether others would come to the same conclusion. So I brought two of my staff, and after pointing out the facts, asked for their explanation. They did not know what to say. My wife came along and looked and asked the same question, and as she turned away remarked casually, 'Well, of course it's the flood.' The first test pit used by Woolley was tiny, so the following archaeological season he dug up several more pits, one of which being ridiculously large, 75 by 60 feet and 65 feet deep. In this pit he found a deposit of clean water-laid soil up to 11 feet thick. Notably, this evidence of the flood was lacking in several other pits in the area, but Woolley wholeheartedly believed that he'd found proof of the biblical flood. After only a few years, another discovery was made at the third Mesopotamian site, Shurapak, where they found a flood stratum. According to the myth, the Sumerian Noah lived in Sharbak. This flood residue separated the skeletal remains dating around 2950 and 2850 BCE, though no other Mesopotamian sites have any such evidence. Despite an attempt made by these researchers to decide an exact timeline for biblical events, the Bible lacks any specific dates for the flood, only stating the 600th year of Noah's life, on the 17th day of the second month. On that day all the springs of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of the heavens were opened. Stories of the Mesopotamian flood are useful since one is able to draw similarities and contrast differences between the flood of Noah's Ark in the Hebrew scriptures and the stories of the Mesopotamian floods, and debate whether they were one and the same. Many scholars through the ages have believed wholeheartedly that the similarities between the two provide irrefutable proof of the biblical flood's existence. As such, the widely accepted view is that the original accounts that appear in Genesis arose in Mesopotamia, and this is further proven by the fact that Mesopotamian accounts of such a great flood outdate the accounts made in the Bible. Furthermore, the Sumerian king list references a great flood. The king list is a very complicated document which has multiple editions. It's thought that it was created at some point in 2100 BCE. The king's list is a report of every monarch, and all the dynasties of ancient Mesopotamia from the origin of kingship, which descended from the heaven up until the time it was made. However, researchers have said that the list is flawed. The length of each king's reign is impossibly long, and several early dynasties have glaring discrepancies. Even with these mistakes in mind, the Sumerian king list is a valuable document which has preserved names and bloodlines of real ancient rulers. According to the king's list, the flood destroyed everything, cutting through the dynasties until kingship once again descended from heaven, and the list of rulers continued. The majority of modern believers often choose to ignore the Sumerian king's list completely, stating that the Mesopotamian flood does not fall into agreement with the views of the Genesis flood. Primarily the fact that if the Bible is to be taken seriously, Noah and his family were the flood's only survivors. The king list opposes this view. The problem is that if you ignore the evidence provided by the Sumerian king list, then the findings of Ur and Kish must too be ignored, as they only support claims of a local flood which would have certainly left survivors. The flood, though intense, was not nearly as large scale as the Bible claimed its Genesis flood to have been, and though severely destructive, would not have destroyed every human in its vicinity. The question of whether what Leonard Woolley found was the remnants of the biblical flood, or simply an unrelated natural disaster, is yet to be answered, because there's a lack of modern investigation. The flooding of the southern Mesopotamia was presumably disastrous enough for stories of a great flood to spread throughout the country, and even the ancient world, but because the records we have are so old, and were passed down by word of mouth for centuries before being written down, many details have surely been exaggerated or simply lost to time. The Daripana site has long fascinated researchers, and this is because it's said to be the final resting place of Noah's Ark. Believers who've seen the photographs have said this is the proof they needed, and that these photographs prove that a boat-shaped object now sits on this mountain. Various other images have been taken of the area, helping to fuel theories that more work needs to be done in order to find out what this thing is. A group of researchers claim they found proof that this was in fact once a giant boat. Back on the 25th of April 2010, a press conference was held in Hong Kong, and it was here that the researchers announced they had found remains of Noah's Ark on the mountain, going on to detail that the discovery was made by a team of researchers from both China and Turkey. The discovery was welcomed with open arms by religious communities, with many of them saying that they knew the Ark was on the mountain, but that this is the proof that they'd been waiting for. When the photographs were released, they surprised many people, as it did appear that the team had found large wooden structures, One scientist even said the following about the discovery. As a scientist, I'm always cautious and somewhat skeptical of bold and spectacular claims, especially when made in defense of the Bible. Yet, as a Bible-believing Christian, the thought of this wooden structure being the remains of Noah's Ark was tantalizing. When the team were grilled by scientists, they said they'd conducted the necessary experiments to come to this conclusion, saying that they had radiocarbon dated some of the wood. Young Wing Chung, one of the researchers, said the following. How can a ship be on a mountain? The only record of a wooden structure on Mount Ararat is Noah's Ark. So up to now I believe this is the most probable explanation. We don't have another explanation. The team also said that when speaking to government officials in Turkey, even they believe their findings, and have said that they too think this is the final resting place of Noah's Ark. The researchers said that once the wood was obtained it was carbon dated to be over 4,800 years old, further saying that they invited other scientists to come and look at their results. Some skeptics though are definitely not won over, and have said that some of these tests don't prove that this is Noah's Ark. Another scientist was critical of the radiocarbon dating, saying that more tests need to be done, and that the whole event sounded like a setup. Although various scientists and researchers spoke out about this, the team carried on with their findings, and even published a paper titled Exploration Team Successfully Venture Inside 4,800-Year-Old Wooden Structure on Snow-Capped Mount Ararat. Experts and Turkish officials believe the artifact is Noah's Ark. As of right now, many religious people believe that this is the final resting place of Noah's Ark, while scientists have said they've made some points that suggest there's no way this is the Ark. Scientists aren't totally against some of the details of the story though. Some of the most unexplored regions on our planet are mountains. There's some that make it their life goal to conquer these massive structures, whereas others are fascinated with what rests on these natural formations. One of the most difficult things that hikers face when exploring these regions is navigating, and this is due to the overgrown wildlife, impossible to pass terrain, and the overwhelming danger of overcoming one of the biggest obstacles in nature. This has also led many to conclude that there are strange objects that can be found in these regions. Interestingly, in recent years a few researchers have come forward and said that at one point a great flood did happen. Recent discoveries by underwater archaeologists suggest that this event ended up sinking many cities. One such find was made off the coast of Turkey, where researchers found traces of ancient civilizations dating back since the time of Noah. One thing that's interesting is that many civilizations talk about a great flood, and some of these are even documented. Some scientists don't actually doubt that this happened, but have suggested it may not have been as massive as it's made out. For example, one theory is that the Great Flood could have been the flooding of the Black Sea, and researchers have said that rising water levels happened in this region around 7,000 years ago. Again, scientists know that there was an event that sank cities. After all, several underwater ancient cities have been discovered. It's the magnitude of the event that people can't seem to agree on. Woods Hole Oceanic Institution said the following about this alleged flood. Now, a new study in the January 2009 issue of Science Review suggests that if the flood occurred at all, it was much smaller, hardly of biblical proportions. Livu Gia-sun of Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution and Florin Philip and Stefan Constantinescu found evidence that Black Sea water levels rose only 5 to 10 meters around 9,400 years ago, not 50 to 60 meters as previously proposed. The flood would have drowned only around 2,000 square kilometers of land, rather than 70,000 square kilometers. So what do you make of these interesting discoveries? Be sure to leave your questions and answers in the comment section below, and help us to grow this community while working to solve these unexplained mysteries. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos.